Williams stood at the entrance of the naval base in San, his crisp white uniform catching the morning sunlight. The security guard behind the bulletproof glass looked him up and down with obvious suspicion. Had been through this routine countless times during his 20-year career in the Navy, but something felt different today. "Identification, please," the guard said, his voice carrying an unusual edge. Reached into his wallet and pulled out his military ID card, sliding it through the small opening in the window. The guard examined it carefully, running it through the scanner twice before looking back at with narrowed eyes. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step aside," the guard said, pressing a button that knew would summon additional security. "Is there a problem?" asked, genuinely confused. His ID was current, his clearance was active, and he had every right to be on the base where he had served faithfully for 2 decades. Within minutes, 2 military police officers approached him. The taller one, Sergeant, spoke first. "Sir, we need you to come with us for questioning." Felt his heart rate increase, but he remained calm. Years of military training had taught him to stay composed under pressure. "May I ask what this is about?" "There's been a report that someone has been impersonating a Navy officer in this area," Sergeant explained as they walked toward the security office. "Your identification appears to match that of a deceased serviceman." The words hit like a physical blow. Deceased serviceman. He was very much alive, standing right there, breathing, talking, confused, but certainly not dead. "There must be some mistake," he said, his voice steady despite the growing anxiety in his chest. "That's what we're here to figure out," the second officer, Corporal, added. "According to our records, Commander Williams died in a training accident 3 months ago." Stopped walking. The accusation was so absurd, so impossible, that for a moment he wondered if he was dreaming. But the concrete beneath his feet, the warm California sun on his face, and the very real handcuffs that Sergeant was now pulling from his belt confirmed that this was happening. "Officers, I can assure you that I am very much alive," said, trying to inject some humor into what was becoming an increasingly surreal situation. "I had breakfast this morning, I drove here in my car, and I have a meeting with Admiral in 30 minutes. "Sir, we're going to need you to remain calm while we sort this out," Sergeant said, though noticed he hadn't put the handcuffs away. "Can you tell us where you've been for the past 3 months?" Ran through the timeline in his head. 3 months ago, he had been deployed on the USS Constitution, a guided missile destroyer operating in the Pacific. The deployment had been routine, mostly training exercises and port visits to allied nations. He had returned to San just 2 weeks ago and had been on leave since then, catching up with family and preparing for his new assignment. "I was deployed on the Constitution," explained. "We returned to port 14 days ago. I have all the documentation to prove it." Corporal was typing something into his tablet. After a few moments, he looked up with a frown. "Sir, according to our deployment records, the Constitution returned to port 3 months and 2 days ago. There's no record of any recent deployment." This was impossible. Remembered every detail of the deployment. The rough seas during the first week, the port call in Yokohama where he had bought gifts for his daughter, the emergency drill they had run just 5 days before returning home. How could the records be wrong? "There has to be an error in your system," insisted. "I can give you the names of every officer who served with me. I can tell you about specific operations we conducted." "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to place your hands behind your back," Sergeant said, finally producing the handcuffs. "We need to take you in for further questioning." As the cold metal closed around his wrists, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. He was being arrested for being himself, accused of impersonating his own identity. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so terrifying. The ride to the military police station was conducted in silence. Stared out the window at the familiar sights of the base where he had spent so much of his adult life. The commissary where he bought groceries, the gym where he worked out every morning, the chapel where he had been married 15 years ago. Everything looked exactly as it should, yet somehow the world had shifted beneath his feet. At the station, they placed him in a small, sterile interrogation room. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the clock on the wall ticked with metronomic persistence. Had been in rooms like this before, but always on the other side of the table, never as the suspect. Detective Lieutenant Sarah entered the room carrying a thick file folder. She was a woman in her 40s with sharp features, and an expression that suggested she had seen every type of scam and deception the military had to offer. "Mr. Williams," she began, deliberately omitting his rank, "or whoever you are, we have a serious problem here." She opened the file and pulled out several documents. The first was a death certificate bearing his name, his service number, and his photograph. The date of death was listed as 3 months and 5 days ago. The cause was listed as training accident classified. Stared at the document in disbelief. The photograph was definitely him, taken during his last promotion ceremony. The service number was correct. Even the emergency contact information listed his wife and his daughter, but the death date was completely wrong. "This has to be some kind of administrative error," said, his voice beginning to crack slightly. "You can call my wife, you can call my daughter, they'll tell you I'm alive." Detective pulled out another document. It was a notification of death benefits being paid to Williams, his wife. According to the paperwork, she had been receiving monthly payments for 3 months. "Your wife, or the woman claiming to be your wife, has been collecting death benefits," Detective explained. "She attended your funeral. There are dozens of witnesses who saw her mourn your death." Felt the room spinning slightly. This was beyond an administrative error. This suggested something far more sinister. Had his wife somehow faked his death for the insurance money? It seemed impossible. Was the most honest person he knew, a woman who returned extra change to cashiers and felt guilty about taking office supplies home from work. "There has to be an explanation," whispered, more to himself than to Detective. "Maybe someone else died and there was a mix-up with the paperwork." "That's what we're going to find out," Detective said, pulling out yet another document. "But in the meantime, impersonating a military officer is a federal offense. If you're running some kind of scam, trying to access military benefits or classified information, you're looking at serious prison time." Closed his eyes and tried to think. How could he prove that he was himself? His fingerprints would match the military records, but apparently those records now showed him as deceased. His DNA would be on file, but again, that would only confirm he was Williams, not that Williams was alive. Then he remembered something that made him sit up straight in his chair. During his second deployment, 7 years ago, he had gotten a tattoo on his shoulder blade. It wasn't just any tattoo, though. It was a specific design that commemorated a rescue operation his ship had conducted during a typhoon in the Philippines. Only a handful of people knew the full story behind that tattoo, and one of them was Admiral, the man he was supposed to meet today. "I need to make a phone call," said suddenly. "You'll have your phone call after we finish the initial questioning," Detective replied. "No, you don't understand," said, leaning forward with new urgency. "I need to call Admiral. He can verify who I am. He knows something that would prove my identity beyond any doubt." Detective looked skeptical. What exactly would Admiral know that we don't? Hesitated. The tattoo itself wasn't classified, but the story behind it involved details of a military operation that he probably shouldn't discuss with anyone without proper clearance. But if it could prove his identity and get him out of this nightmare, he had to try. "I have a tattoo," said finally. "Admiral knows about it. He knows the story behind it. It would prove that I am who I say I am." "A tattoo?" Detective looked even more skeptical. "Anyone could get a tattoo." "Not this one," said firmly. "Not with this specific design, not with the meaning it has. Admiral will understand when he sees it." Detective stared at him for a long moment, then made a note in her file. "We'll see about that phone call," she said. "But first, I want to hear your version of events. Start from the beginning. Tell me everything about this deployment that supposedly happened but has no record of existing." Took a deep breath and began to speak. He told her about receiving orders for the deployment, about the weeks of preparation, about boarding the Constitution and leaving San Harbor. He described the exercises they had conducted, the other ships they had worked with, the weather they had encountered. As he spoke, he watched Detective's expression carefully. She was writing everything down, but her face remained skeptical. To her, he was probably just a very well-informed con artist who had somehow gotten access to detailed military information. But knew he was telling the truth, and somewhere in the system there had to be evidence to support his story. Someone had made a mistake, filed the wrong paperwork, or entered incorrect information into a computer. The truth would come out eventually. He just hoped it would come out before they charged him with federal crimes he hadn't committed. The interrogation continued for 2 more hours, with Detective asking increasingly detailed questions about the deployment, about his service record, about his family and personal life. Answered everything as completely as possible, but he could see that each answer only seemed to make her more convinced that he was running an elaborate scam. Finally, she closed the file and stood up. "Mr. Williams, or whoever you are, you're going to be held overnight while we continue our investigation. Tomorrow morning, we'll see about that phone call to Admiral." As they led him to a holding cell, felt a deep sense of unreality settling over him. 24 hours ago, he had been a decorated Navy officer looking forward to his next assignment. Now he was in military custody, accused of impersonating himself, with his own death certificate as evidence against him. The cell was small and sparse, containing only a narrow cot and a stainless steel sink and toilet. As the door clanged shut behind him, sat on the cot and put his head in his hands. He thought about and who probably had no idea what was happening to him. He thought about Admiral waiting for a meeting that would never happen. Most of all, he thought about that tattoo on his shoulder blade and the story that only a handful of people knew. If Admiral remembered, if he was willing to listen, maybe there was still hope of resolving this impossible situation. Lay back on the thin mattress and stared at the ceiling, trying to make sense of a world that had suddenly stopped making sense. Tomorrow would bring answers, one way or another. He just hoped they would be the right answers. The morning came with the harsh fluorescent lights flickering on at exactly 600 hours. Had barely slept, his mind racing through possibilities and explanations that made less sense as the night wore on. The sound of boots on polished floors echoed through the corridor as guards began their morning routines. Detective appeared at his cell door at 800, accompanied by a Navy chaplain and what appeared to be a medical officer. Her expression was unreadable, but detected something different in her demeanor, perhaps less certainty than she had shown the day before. "Williams," she said, using his last name without rank, "we need to talk." They moved him back to the same interrogation room, but this time the atmosphere felt different. The medical officer, who introduced himself as doctor, carried a laptop and several files that he arranged carefully on the table. "We've been investigating your claims," Detective began, settling into her chair across from him. "And we've discovered some inconsistencies in the official records." Felt his heart rate increase. "What kind of inconsistencies?" Doctor opened his laptop and turned it so could see the screen. "We pulled your complete medical records from the Navy database. According to these files, you underwent a routine physical examination 2 weeks ago at the Naval Medical Center here in San." Leaned forward to look at the screen. There it was, his complete medical record, including blood work, x-rays, and a full physical examination dated exactly 14 days ago. "That's right. It was part of my return-to-duty processing after the deployment." "The problem," Detective said, "is that according to the personnel database, you died 3 months ago. Dead people don't take physical examinations." Doctor clicked to another screen. "We also found something interesting in the dental records. You had a filling replaced 6 weeks ago. The dentist who performed the work, Lieutenant Commander, specifically remembers the procedure because you mentioned it was your first dental work in 5 years. Remembered that appointment clearly. The old filling had started causing pain during the deployment, and he had scheduled the dental work as soon as they returned to port. Lieutenant Commander works out of Building 47. She has a small scar on her left hand from a childhood accident. She mentioned it when I asked about the pain I might experience." Detective and doctor exchanged glances. "That's very specific information," doctor said. "Information that would be difficult for an impersonator to know." "Because I'm not an impersonator," said firmly. "I'm exactly who I say I am." The chaplain, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Son, we've also been looking into your family situation. We contacted your wife yesterday evening." Felt his stomach drop. "You called, what did you tell her?" "We told her we were investigating some inconsistencies in military records and needed to verify some information," the chaplain said gently. "Her reaction was unusual." "What do you mean, unusual?" Detective pulled out a small recording device. "We recorded the conversation with her permission. I think you should hear this." She pressed play and heard his wife's voice, tinged with confusion and distress. "I don't understand," his voice came through the speaker. "You're asking about but is dead. He died 3 months ago in a training accident. I attended his funeral. I've been receiving the death benefits." The investigator's voice on the recording was calm and professional. "Mrs. Williams, can you describe the circumstances of your husband's death?" "They said it was classified," replied, her voice breaking slightly. "Some kind of training accident. They wouldn't give me details. The funeral was closed casket because of the nature of the injuries." Felt sick, his wife genuinely believed he was dead. She had mourned him, buried him, and moved on with her life thinking he was gone forever. "There's more," detective said, pausing the recording. "We asked her about the deployment you claim to have been on." She pressed play again. "Deployment?" His voice sounded confused. "Wasn't deployed. He was here in San for training exercises. That's where the accident happened." The recording continued with describing the official notification of death, the funeral arrangements, and the difficult process of adjusting to life without her husband. Her grief was real, her confusion genuine. Detective stopped the recording. "Your wife has no memory of any deployment. According to her, you were never away from San." Sat in stunned silence. How could not remember the deployment? He had called her regularly, sent emails, even video chatted with her and several times while at sea. They had talked about his upcoming return, made plans for his leave time. "This doesn't make sense," said finally. "I called her from the ship. We talked about school project, about the problems with the water heater at home. How can she not remember any of that?" Doctor leaned forward. "That's what we're trying to figure out. We've requested your complete service record from Naval Personnel Command, not just the local database. We should have that information by this afternoon." "In the meantime," detective said, "tell me about this tattoo you mentioned, the one you think Admiral can verify." Felt a glimmer of hope. "It's on my right shoulder blade. It's a design that incorporates the symbol of the USS Constitution with a Philippine flag and a date. The date is from 7 years ago, when we rescued survivors from a fishing vessel during Typhoon Maria." "Anyone could research that rescue operation," detective pointed out. "Not the details," insisted. "The tattoo includes coordinates that were never made public, the exact location where we found the survivors. Admiral was the operations officer on that mission. He would recognize those coordinates immediately." Doctor was making notes. "What else can you tell us about the tattoo? Any other details that would be difficult to fabricate?" Thought carefully. The tattoo artist was a Filipino-American sailor named Petty Officer Santos. He was deployed with us on that mission. He created the design specifically for the crew members who participated in the rescue. There were only 8 of us who got the tattoo, and each one is slightly different, but they all include those same coordinates. "Do you remember the names of the other 7? Closed his eyes and recalled that day in Bay when they had all gone together to get the tattoos. Lieutenant Johnson, Petty Officer Martinez, Seaman Collins, Chief, Petty Officer Santos, who did the work, Seaman Williams, and Lieutenant Commander. "Wait," Doctor said, looking up from his notes. "Did you say Lieutenant Commander, the same who did your dental work?" "Yes, though she was just lieutenant back then. We've served together on multiple deployments over the years." Detective was writing furiously. "This is getting interesting. If can verify both the dental work and the tattoo story, that would be very compelling evidence." A knock on the door interrupted them. A young corpsman entered and handed Detective a sealed envelope. She opened it and read the contents, her eyebrows rising with each line. "This is from Naval Personnel Command," she said slowly. "The complete service record for Williams." She looked up with an expression he couldn't quite read. "According to these records, you are currently listed as active duty, deployed aboard the USS Constitution with an expected return date of next week." The room fell silent. Doctor reached for the papers and read them himself, then handed them to the chaplain. "This is impossible," the chaplain said finally. "We have 2 completely contradictory sets of records. One says he's dead, the other says he's deployed and expected back next week." Felt a surge of vindication mixed with continued confusion. "So I'm not crazy. The records do show the deployment." "But that still doesn't explain the death certificate," detective said. "Or why your wife believes you're dead, or why the local database shows you as deceased." Doctor closed his laptop and stood up. "I think we need to call Admiral immediately, and we need to examine this tattoo." "I've been saying that since yesterday," said, unable to keep the frustration out of his voice. "The problem is," detective said, Admiral is currently deployed himself. He's aboard the USS in the Western Pacific. We can try to reach him via secure communications, but it may take some time. Felt his hope deflating again? How long? Could be anywhere from a few hours to a few days, depending on their operational status. The chaplain stood up as well. In the meantime, I think we should examine this tattoo and try to contact Lieutenant Commander. If she can verify the details you've provided, it would go a long way toward supporting your claims. They moved to the medical facility within the military police complex, where was asked to remove his shirt. Doctor photographed the tattoo from multiple angles, while detective took detailed notes about its design and placement. The tattoo was exactly as had described. The USS Constitution's emblem was intricately woven with a stylized Philippine flag, and below it, in small but clear numbers, were the coordinates had mentioned. The date of the rescue operation was incorporated into the design in a way that looked natural rather than added as an afterthought. "This is sophisticated work," Doctor observed, studying the photographs on his camera. "The level of detail, the way the elements are integrated, this would have taken considerable time and skill to create." "And expensive," Detective added. "Someone running a con wouldn't typically invest this much in such an elaborate fake tattoo." They returned to the interrogation room while Detective made calls to locate Lieutenant Commander. Within an hour, she had tracked her down at the Naval Dental Clinic, where was between patients. "Doctor," Detective said into the phone, with the call on speaker so could hear, "we need to verify some information about Commander Williams." His voice came clearly through the speaker. "Is he all right? He seemed fine when I saw him last week for his follow-up appointment." Felt relief wash over him. Remembered the recent dental work. "Last week," Detective asked. "Can you be more specific about the date?" "Let me check his file," said. They could hear papers rustling. "Yes, here it is, December 10th. He came in for a post-procedure check on the filling I replaced about 6 weeks ago. Everything looked good, no complications." Detective looked at with raised eyebrows. December 10th was exactly 1 week ago, which would be impossible if had been dead for 3 months. "Doctor," Detective continued, "do you remember Commander Williams from any other context? Any other procedures or encounters?" "Oh yes," said immediately. "And I go way back. We served together on the Constitution about 7 years ago. We were both part of that rescue operation during Typhoon Maria in the Philippines. Great mission, saved a lot of lives." "Do you remember anything specific about that mission?" "Absolutely, and several of us got tattoos to commemorate it. Beautiful work by Petty Officer Santos. Got his on his right shoulder blade, incorporated the coordinates where we found the survivors. I still have mine on my left ankle." Detective looked at Doctor, who nodded. This was exactly matching's account. "Doctor, this is going to sound like a strange question," Detective said, "but do you have any knowledge of Commander Williams being declared dead?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Dead? What are you talking about? I just saw him last week. He was very much alive. We talked about his upcoming assignment and his daughter's college applications." According to some military records, Commander Williams died in a training accident 3 months ago. "That's impossible," said firmly. "I've seen him multiple times since then. The dental work 6 weeks ago, the follow-up last week, and I ran into him at the commissary about a month ago. We talked about his deployment and how glad he was to be back." Detective ended the call and sat back in her chair. "Well, Mr. Williams, it appears that either you're the most elaborate con artist in military history, or there's been a massive clerical error somewhere in the system." Felt cautiously optimistic for the first time since this nightmare began. "So you believe me now?" "I'm starting to," Detective admitted. "But we still need to figure out how this happened. How do military records get this confused? And more importantly, why does your wife think you're dead?" Doctor was reviewing his notes. "I have a theory," he said slowly. "What if someone else died and through a series of administrative errors, that person's death was attributed to Commander Williams in some databases but not others?" "That would explain the contradictory records," the chaplain agreed. "But it wouldn't explain why his wife has no memory of the deployment or believes he's been dead for 3 months." Had been thinking about this problem all night. What if was told I was dead, attended a funeral, and has been grieving for 3 months while I was actually deployed? If I was supposed to be on leave and instead got emergency deployment orders, and those orders were classified or not properly communicated to families. That's possible, Detective said. Emergency deployments sometimes happen with very short notice. Families are usually, but if there was confusion about your status. We need to contact the USS Constitution, Doctor said. They should have records of who was actually aboard during this deployment. Detective was already reaching for her phone. And we need to find out who was buried under William's name 3 months ago. As she began making calls, realized that while his identity might be getting, the mystery was actually deepening. Someone had died and been buried as him. His wife had genuine memories of his death and funeral. The military had been paying death benefits to his family for 3 months. This wasn't just a simple case of mistaken identity or clerical error. This was something far more complex, and was beginning to wonder if he really wanted to know how deep this rabbit hole went. The investigation was just beginning. The call to the USS Constitution took 3 hours to connect through the Navy's secure communication system. During that time, Detective had been busy tracking down the source of the death certificate and the mysterious funeral that had attended. What she discovered would change everything thought he knew about the past 3 months. Captain, the current commanding officer of the USS Constitution, finally came through on the secure video link. His weather-worn face filled the screen in the communications room where Detective and Doctor had gathered. Detective, Captain began, I understand you're investigating some irregularities concerning Commander Williams. I have to tell you, this is one of the strangest requests I've ever received. Captain, we need to verify the crew roster for your recent deployment, Detective said. Specifically, we need to know if Commander Williams was aboard your vessel for the past 3 months. Captain consulted his tablet. Commander Williams was indeed assigned to our deployment. However, there's something very unusual about his service record during this period. Leaned closer to the screen. Unusual how, sir? The captain looked directly at through the video link. Commander, according to my records, you requested emergency leave 2 days into our deployment. You received orders to return immediately to SAN for what was classified as a family emergency. The room fell silent, felt his world shifting again. Sir, I don't recall any emergency leave. I remember serving the entire deployment. That's impossible, Commander, Captain said firmly. You were only aboard for 48 hours. Lieutenant Commander was reassigned from shore duty to take over your responsibilities for the remainder of the deployment. Doctor spoke up. Captain, could you tell us the exact dates of this emergency leave? Captain checked his records again. Commander Williams departed the Constitution on October 18th via emergency helicopter transport. The reason given was critical family medical emergency requiring immediate return to CONUS. Detective was calculating dates on her notepad. October 18th was exactly 3 months and 4 days ago, 1 day before the date listed on the death certificate. Felt like he was losing his grip on reality. He had clear memories of the entire deployment, of being aboard the Constitution for months, of the operations they had conducted, the ports they had visited. How could Captain be saying he was only there for 2 days? Captain, said, his voice strained, do you remember me being aboard at all? Do you have any personal recollection of our interactions during the deployment? Captain frowned thoughtfully. Commander, I'm afraid I don't have clear personal memories of you from this deployment. We had a full crew of over 300 personnel, and with the emergency departure happening so quickly, there wasn't much interaction. What about other crew members? Detective asked. Could you connect us with some of the officers who might remember Commander Williams? I can try to locate some of the senior staff, Captain agreed. Give me a few minutes to round up whoever is available. While they waited, Doctor pulled aside. Commander, I need to ask you some specific questions about your memories of the deployment. Can you describe the ship's daily routine, the specific operations you conducted? Described in detail the ship's schedule, the morning briefings, the training exercises they had run, the weather conditions they had encountered. His memories were vivid and consistent, filled with the kind of specific details that would be difficult to fabricate. And the port calls, Doctor pressed. You mentioned Yokohama earlier. We spent 4 days in Yokohama, said confidently. I went shopping in the district, bought a Hello Kitty backpack and a silk scarf. I ate dinner at a small restaurant near the port that served the best ramen I'd ever tasted. Doctor was taking notes, but his expression was troubled. Commander, according to Captain's deployment schedule, the Constitution never visited Yokohama on this deployment. Stared at him. That's impossible. I was there. I have the receipts from the purchases. I can describe the restaurant in detail. Do you still have those receipts? Thought about his wallet. They should be in my wallet or at home in my desk drawer where I always put foreign receipts. Detective rejoined them. We're going to need to examine those receipts, and we need to search your home for any evidence of this deployment. Captain returned to the screen with two other officers, Lieutenant Johnson and Chief Petty Officer Martinez. Recognized both names immediately as crew members he remembered serving with during the deployment. Detective addressed the officers on screen. Do you remember serving with Commander Williams during your recent deployment? Lieutenant Johnson spoke first. I remember Commander Williams being assigned to our deployment, but he left almost immediately for emergency leave. I don't think I had more than a brief conversation with him. Chief Martinez nodded agreement. Same here. He seemed like a good officer from what little I saw, but he was only aboard for a couple of days before getting called back. Felt desperate. Chief Martinez, don't you remember our conversation about your daughter's wedding? You showed me pictures of the ceremony. Chief Martinez looked confused. Commander, my daughter isn't married. She's only 16 years old. The contradiction hit like a physical blow. He had clear memories of conversations and interactions that these men were saying never happened. Either they were lying, or something was seriously wrong with his memory. Captain, detective said, we need to know more about this emergency leave. Who authorized it? What was the specific nature of the family emergency? Captain consulted his records again. The orders came directly from Naval Personnel Command in Washington. The authorization code indicates it was related to a serious medical emergency involving Commander Williams' immediate family. What kind of medical emergency? The records just say, critical medical situation requiring immediate family presence. Nothing more specific. Detective was writing furiously. Captain, do your records show how Commander Williams was transported back to San? Emergency helicopter to the nearest port, then military air transport to Naval Air Station North Island. He should have arrived back in San on October 19th. The date on the death certificate. Was beginning to understand that something had happened on October 19th, something that had somehow erased 3 months of his life and replaced his memories with false ones of a deployment that had only lasted 2 days. After ending the call with the Constitution, Detective stood up with determination. We're going to your house, Commander. We need to search for evidence of what really happened during those 3 months. The drive to his house in the suburbs of San was surreal. As they pulled into the driveway, saw car in the garage, exactly where it should be. But there was something different about the house that he couldn't quite identify. Detective had called ahead to request permission for the search. She met them at the front door and felt his heart break at the sight of her. She looked older, worn down by grief, dressed in black as if she were still in mourning. Said softly, stepping toward her. She looked directly at him and her face went completely pale. Oh my God, she whispered, reaching out to touch his face. You look exactly like him, exactly like. It's me, I am. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. Is dead. I buried him. I saw his body. She turned to Detective. Who is this man? Why does he look so much like my husband? Detective gently explained the situation while stood frozen, watching his wife struggle with the impossible reality that he was alive. Listened with growing confusion and distress. This doesn't make any sense, she said finally. Died in a training accident on October 19th. There was an explosion during a live-fire exercise. His injuries were so severe that they recommended a closed-casket funeral. Followed them into his own house, feeling like a stranger in familiar surroundings. Everything was as he remembered it, but there were subtle changes. The family photos on the mantelpiece had been rearranged, with several pictures of him moved to a place of honor as if creating a memorial. His favorite chair had been moved to a different position. In the master bedroom, opened the closet to reveal that his clothes had been packed away in boxes, replaced by her expanded wardrobe. I donated most of his uniforms to the Navy Relief Fund, she explained, but I kept a few things for. Detective began searching through his desk while watched nervously. In the top drawer, she found something that made her stop short. "Commander, come look at this." Approached the desk to see Detective holding a stack of sympathy cards, all addressed to Williams on the occasion of her husband's death. There were dozens of them, from friends, family members, and military colleagues. The dates on the postmarks confirmed they had been sent in late October, shortly after his supposed death. Said gently, "Show me where you think I'm buried." Led them to the Mount Soledad Veterans Memorial Cemetery, a beautiful hillside location overlooking Sand Bay. She walked directly to a gravestone that bore name, rank, and service dates. The inscription read, "Beloved husband and father died in service to his country." Stared at his own headstone, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. "Do you remember the funeral? Can you describe it to me?" "It was beautiful," she said, wiping away fresh tears. "Admiral gave the eulogy. He talked about your courage and dedication, read a poem. The honor guard folded the flag and presented it to me." Admiral looked up sharply. "He was here for the funeral." "Of course," said. "He was your commanding officer. He spoke about how much you meant to the Navy, about the sacrifice you made for your country." Detective was on her phone, speaking in low, urgent tones. When she finished the call, she approached with a grim expression. "Commander, I just spoke with Naval Personnel Command. Admiral returned from deployment 2 days ago and is currently at the Pentagon. They're arranging for us to speak with him within the hour." And, prompted, sensing there was more, "They also confirmed the identity of the person who was actually buried in this grave." Detective paused, choosing her words carefully. "It was Petty Officer David Williams. No relation to you, just the same last name. He was killed in a training accident on October 19th. Felt the pieces of the puzzle beginning to fall into place. Same last name, similar service record. "It gets worse," Detective continued. "Petty Officer Williams was also married with a young daughter. His wife, Williams, was supposed to be of his death and received the burial honors." Looked at his wife, who was staring at Detective in shock. "Are you saying there was a mix-up, that I've been mourning the wrong person?" "That's exactly what I'm saying. The administrative error was monumental. 2 sailors with the same last name, both with wives named, both with young daughters. When Petty Officer Williams died, someone pulled the wrong file and the wrong family." "But I saw the body," protested. "I identified him at the morgue." Detective shook her head sadly. "Mrs. Williams, you identified the body of Petty Officer David Williams. You were told it was your husband, so that's what you believed. The injuries from the explosion made visual identification difficult, and you were expecting to see your husband." Sat down heavily on a nearby bench. "So really is alive, and I've been grieving for a stranger." "That appears to be correct, and there's something else. Commander Williams' memories of the 3-month deployment are also false. He was given emergency leave on October 18th to return home for what he was told was a family medical emergency. But when he arrived, he was met by officials who informed him of his own death. Felt a cold realization washing over him. The medical emergency wasn't, it was me. They needed to bring me back to deal with the identity mix-up." "Exactly, and that's where things get complicated. According to the records I'm finding, you were placed under medical supervision for 3 months while the Navy tried to sort out the administrative nightmare they had created." "Medical supervision? Where?" Detective hesitated. "The Naval Medical Center has a classified wing for treating personnel who have been exposed to psychological warfare techniques or who need memory modification for security purposes. Commander, I believe you've been undergoing treatment to suppress your memory of the past 3 months while the Navy figured out how to handle this situation." Felt his knees buckle. "They erased my memory." "Not erased, replaced. Someone decided it would be easier to give you false memories of a deployment than to deal with the psychological trauma of learning about your own mistake in death and the impact on your family." "But the tattoo," said desperately. "Admiral can still verify the tattoo." Detective's phone rang. She answered it, spoke briefly, then hung up with a satisfied expression. "That was Admiral. He's been briefed on the situation and is flying out here immediately. He specifically mentioned that he's looking forward to seeing your tattoo again and clearing up this mess." Stood up slowly, approaching with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "If this is true, if you're really alive." "I am," said, reaching for her hand. I'm alive, I'm here, and I've missed you more than you can possibly imagine. As they embraced for the first time in 3 months, realized that while the nightmare of being arrested for impersonating himself was ending, he now faced the challenge of rebuilding his life and his family's trust. The Navy would have to answer for their mishandling of the situation, but more importantly, he would have to heal from 3 months of unnecessary grief and separation. Admiral arrived 12 hours later, took one look at its tattoo, confirmed the details that only the two of them knew, and immediately ordered a full investigation into the security breach that had allowed such a catastrophic administrative error to occur. 6 months later, had been fully reinstated, the Navy had issued formal apologies and compensation to both families affected by the mix-up, and new procedures had been implemented to prevent such errors in the future. Petty Officer David Williams received the proper burial with full honors that his family deserved, and his wife finally received the closure she needed. Returned to active duty, but he never forgot the surreal experience of being arrested for being himself, or the importance of the small details, like a tattoo commemorating a rescue mission, that can sometimes be the only thing standing between truth and fiction. The case became legendary within Navy administrative circles, serving as a cautionary tale about the importance of accurate record-keeping and the devastating human impact that can result from bureaucratic errors. Most importantly, it demonstrated that sometimes the most unbelievable truth requires the most ordinary evidence to prove it.